Hello again. I'm Kenny Fikes, your host of the iKnowMedia Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity alongside, through empirical experience, alongside reasoned application and analysis. So, Elisa, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Hey guys, I'm Elisa Simmons. I'm a Montessori guide in East Texas, and I'm excited for tonight's conversation.
Hi everyone, I am Jay Ellis. I am a mom of three. I am in Houston, Texas, and I'm really excited to learn more about our allies and our adversaries.
I'm Michael Malabsky, Denver, Colorado, pediatrician, father of 7, and super excited to be part of the group.
Great. So today we're going to talk about something that Michael and I have been wanting to talk about for a while, that I hope, along with the whole idea of us keeping this stuff going so that we're taking, again, our bite out of this elephant to keep things going instead of letting them die. But one of the things that was really important in the past was the alliance between the Jewish faith and Jewish people and Black folks, particularly in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. We were allies because we understood that, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, that I'll quote, read the real quote later, so that basically an injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, something like that. But with that said, there was recently, I don't know if it was a page, 2, 3, whatever it was, but there was a major ad taken out in the New York Times by a group, is a joint letter signed by over 600 multicultural Jewish denominations, organizations, and synagogues, which, if I haven't done the research, but if what's reported is correct, that represents over 50% of the Jewish people in America. Now, if that doesn't move you, nothing moves you, right? I would love to be able to be a part of something that said, hey, we as Black America speak on this, and it speaks on behalf of over 50% of the organizations, churches, and whatever else that we belong to in a single voice. What does that alone look like in terms of movement? But in any case, we want to talk about that today. We want to talk about what that alliance looked like in the past. We want to talk about what it means. And so let me start with this first line from something it's along the lines of what I just said. What about the idea of multicultural denominations, organizations coming together? What does that say alone? A cause that is similar in nature, not just to their own cause, but they thought it was so important to support Black Lives Matter because, number one, it's right, and number two, it's so similar to their own cause. We speak in one voice. I could quote that. In that ad, it said, we speak in one voice. And so in the spirit of Jay Cherie speaking first in the ski weave for Kamala Harris, I'm going to say, Michael, why don't you lead us off today?
I think that one of the statements in that letter was that Jewish people have always felt that in a place where anybody is oppressed or any group doesn't feel safe, then none of us are safe, and that where any group can be experiencing what's considered random violence or provoked violence, then it can happen to us. Jews feel especially vulnerable to that, especially this past year. I mean, the Jewish community has certainly had our share. We can reel off Pittsburgh, and we can reel off the events in New York, and there's all kinds of attacks. But Jewish people are feeling that insecurity acutely, very much so in the last year to 2 years. And so I think that, and once again, I don't speak for every Jewish person. I don't think that the Jewish community is not a monolithic thing, and we can talk about the complexity there a little bit, because I think most people outside the Jewish community don't quite understand how varied internally the Jewish community can be. But this is a topic that's very sensitive to us, and this, I think, goes back to why Jewish people have always been drawn to support for the civil rights movement, all the way back to the dawn of the civil rights movement as well.
Well, I think something you said, that the Jewish people are not monolithic, is amazingly important, because be that as it may, Jewish faith, over 50% of them, according to this, in terms of their representation, came together and said, we speak in one voice.
Sure.
Part of the issue, I think, in the past and currently with the African-American community, is that we want to be monolithic. monolithic in some way, and we have politicized our agenda instead of making our agenda our agenda. Jay Cherie, why don't go next on this?
I mean, I think we have a lot in common in terms of history, right? As Blacks in America, our ancestors went through something that was horrific and incredible, and something that you probably couldn't think of if someone paid you to, that we call slavery. And then Jewish people were subject to the Holocaust, right? And, I sometimes hear people kind of try to compare those and say, I've heard Black people say, well, that's not so bad because we had slavery for all these hundreds of years, right? And how do you compare such a thing? You just can't. You just can't. What we know is that there were human beings who suffered in ways they never should have. And they suffered in huge numbers and countless numbers. And that suffering wasn't just the result of a natural disaster, or famine, or any plague. It was at the hands of other human beings. And so I think we have that in common, that suffering. And as a result of that suffering, there's still all of this aftermath. It wasn't enough that those things ended. People just didn't have the right to exist and be themselves after all of that. All of those lessons we should have learned, we still haven't. And so Black people are oppressed in this nation. Brown people are oppressed in this nation. But we know that our Jewish friends are as well, based on their faith. And so I think they intimately understand that oppression because they potentially face it all the time, especially if they choose to live their faith out loud. And we certainly have seen a lot of attacks towards the Jewish community since Donald Trump took office, and we know that that's no coincidence. He gave everyone permission to do that. So I think the Jewish community very much empathizes with what we've experienced.
That's right. And one of the differences in the way it was done, but it was done successfully. You don't have to do things the same way, but I've always admired the way the Jewish community handled their issues. In other words, this is Kenny talking, obviously. No one Jewish has told me this, but I read between the lines, and I kind of feel like the Jewish community say, you know what? We don't give a damn if they like us, but they're going to respect us because we're going to be strong. We're going to have our stuff together. We're going to be economically together, etc. And whether they like us or not, we really don't give a damn. Whereas it seemed like a lot of times what we've done as African Americans, and I'm certainly not slighting this, when there was good leadership, we wanted to integrate so much to say, we wanted to believe that we were living and moving towards a post-racial society. And we wanted to move to the suburbs of white people. And we wanted to do all these things. And we wanted to, sorry guys, we wanted to have our Jack and Jill. We wanted to mirror everything they did to sort of look like we fit. Whereas the Jewish community said, well, you know what? We'll build our community within this community, and then we'll have some freedom. Elisa, what you got?
I think that there's a time and place for every conversation. And I think that what we're kind of doing here as a group of 4 people, and when we have our guests, is we're having an intimate conversation that we're just allowing the world to be part of. And I think that when those conversations happen on intimate levels, you get to say things or ask questions of, like when we specifically tag Michael into the conversation, and as he said, I can't, speak for all Jewish people. It's like, but in these intimate conversations, you get to be our voice right now. And I think when the Jewish community put that in the newspaper, they were saying that they didn't say Jewish people have trauma or Jewish people have, or have odds stacked against them. They were like, hey, this is the topic right now, and this is what we're going to focus on right now. And I think that's where people get messed up when they're supporting a cause. So many people will say Black Lives Matter, and they're like, well, all lives matter. We get to say all lives matter, but you don't need to say it in this content. It's not the appropriate time for that conversation. And I think the Jewish people putting that 1-page ad out in how boldly they did it was like, there's nothing else we're going to focus on right this second except for this issue. And I think it speaks powerful, and it should show our country that we can unite over something. And let's do it. I mean, let's make the progress.
But they said,
Hold on, Michael. I like what you said, Elisa, about the 4 people having an intimate conversation and having people walk into that. That's very good. That's astute. Other thing is, if someone could find while we're talking, there was a piece, I don't have the note in front of me, in that article where it basically said the Black Lives Matter movement is today's civil rights movement. Go ahead, Michael.
But that's what I was going to say. It is the current version, and therefore anyone, the Jewish people especially, need to embrace it, recognize it, support it. And you know what wasn't in that letter either, guys, is that it didn't sit there and dissect. It didn't go to the Black Lives Matter website and dissect all the language from people who may be running the organization and may have put political language here or there. It didn't talk about that at all. It was talking about it from the big picture importance standpoint as to what it represents for most people out, who are most people in the country and most people who are standing behind it. It has nothing to do with specifics of political agendas. It's the big picture. And that's exactly right. They said it's the modern day civil rights movement, and that's why they felt the need to speak up.
Well, another thing that made it powerful, and if Jay Cherie, you could speak to this after I say it, is that it didn't try to own it. So many times when people that are not Black speak to Black issues, even when it sounds nice, if you dissect it, it's about them. It didn't say we the Jewish people support it because we this. We the Jewish people support it because we that. It was very clear to say, hey, led by Black folks. Black Lives Matter is important, led by the Black Lives Matter movement, but we support it. We're not jumping in. And what you also said is important in terms of it didn't dissect it, because sometimes people get caught in the minutia of controversy. For example, today I had a meal with a person who said, well, I have problems with Black women who have abortions standing up for Black Lives Matter. And we have to have that conversation, right? So Jay Cherie, go ahead, please.
Well, I mean, they were unapologetic. I think that they didn't feel that they needed to, first of all, I don't think they felt that they had anything huge to gain from doing this. And I appreciate that, right? Because we're happy when we see companies and corporations take a stance about this and say Black Lives Matter. But we know that a large part of why they're doing it is because they want to keep our business, right? The Jewish community didn't have anything like that before them. There was nothing like that motivating them. They could easily have remained silent, and probably wouldn't have really harmed them to do that. So that shows a lot of integrity and a lot of character. And it shows fearlessness, because in stepping into this fight with us, they open themselves up to attack. And so I think we should always be aware of that. And no matter what the history that we may have with them is, we should always remember that they are pretty much steadfast allies, because they were there in the civil rights movement. And God knows that was dangerous. Like today, we're living in dangerous times, but that was some dangerous stuff going on for a real long time. And it was random. And there wasn't even going to be any retaliation against police officers who might have harmed a protester. And so I think we have to really recognize that they've always been fearless and been right there with us, even if there were times in history where we may have had, issues that we needed to address with one another. They have always still been there and been willing to speak up and stand up on behalf of this cause for us. And I think we should always keep that in mind, because not every group is doing that for us.
Right. Got anything to add to that, Elisa?
Well, I found the quote that you were asking for. And then also, we all like to tag team in on that. Man, they did that, there was no, I'm sorry, there was no tiptoeing around, because at one point in the speech, they actually say, hold on, I'm going to read it, because it's like one of those, it was a mic drop. It was without anything else. It was, you can't, don't even try. It was like, this brought an opportunity to unequivocally, I can't say that word right now because it's Sunday and I'm off work, state as a large swath of Jewish community organizers that we stand behind Black Lives Movement, and that any attempt to divide that movement will not land. Just don't even try. Stay away. This is where we're going to be at. This is what we're going to stand for. Back off. And I think other groups in the country need to see that doesn't take away from their Jewishness. It's them. They're not saying Black Lives Matter more than Jewish people. They're not saying that religion that isn't Jewish is less. They're just saying this is where we are. And let's get behind that. Let's just do it. Let them be the tipping point for the whole country to say, yep, we can do this.
Well, it's also intellectual. What you said is correct, and I add to that by saying, they're saying, I think, do your thing, and we'll do our thing, and we're going to support you doing your thing, because we all should be able to do our thing. And it's intellectual, because if anyone knows who Martin Niemöller is, we spoke about this on the show before, but one of the quotes from the ad in the Times said something to the effect of, so I shouldn't call it a quote, but it basically said in summary, we know that freedom and safety for any of us speaks for all of us. And if you go back to Martin Niemöller's saying, he says, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. I think that letter understands this. No, I know that letter understands this. And who doesn't understand this are the white folks in Appalachia who doesn't understand that Donald Trump and his cronies would come for them next because they're pawns in that game. What do you got, Michael?
You know, I think that I want to explore a little bit of something you mentioned before about how the African American community in America has sought or wanted this idea that we just want to be absorbed and acquire all the things. And I know, once again, I know that not every segment of the Black community is monolithic, and not every segment has the same aspirations. But one lesson that I think the Jewish experience historically, and when I say historically, I want to say going back, let's say several thousand years, because we have an actual record of a lot of that stuff. That's what the Talmud is, actually, is firsthand accounts of a lot of this stuff going back several thousand years. Is that the more, in every setting where the Jewish people found themselves in the diaspora, the more the Jewish people tried to not be Jewish, tried to put being Jewish aside and tried to be part of more and more the society they were in, whether that society was Babylonia, whether that society was Spain in the 1400s, whether that society was Europe in the 20s and 30s. The more we tried to do that, the more everyone worked hard to remind us that you're Jewish, and that you and worked hard to, increase the oppression and increase the hurt and the pain. And in America, the American experience, and we can explain a little bit more how Judaism kind of split and spread. But like you said, it allowed us to say, this is who we are, and we're going to embrace it, and we're going to love ourselves first, love who we are, love our heritage, love what that can do into the experience that we're in now, and not worry about necessarily trying to be and integrate and be like everybody else. And that's when we experienced a different level of prosperity and peace and movement.
Well, so at the risk of some of my Black folks turning me off, if they hear me, I'm going to go here. One of the things that I've not liked a lot for years, and I'll tell you how I do it in my life, but it is a soapbox. So I'm not going to say I'm not on a soapbox. I'm standing on it firmly, is that a lot of professionals or college educated Black people decide, you know what, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to the suburbs. I'm putting a fence around my backyard, and I'm not looking back. I've got mine. I admire that. I don't believe Jewish people do that. I think you're always looking back and pulling each other up. And how I've handled that, I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I live on the east side of Knoxville, which is not technically, but it's kind of the Black side of Knoxville. A lot of Black professionals who move here, they all go west. I made it a point to find a neighborhood and a house that I wanted on this side of town. Turns out it used to be the old rich neighborhood before they moved out. The white neighborhood is the golf course 2 streets over. But I've long thought that we should have a little bit more mirroring of how the Jewish people have done that, and always looking out for each other. And you don't have to be seen and heard. You just have to be respected and build something. What do you got, Jay?
Well, one of the first things I want to say before addressing that is I appreciate that we don't have to convince the Jewish community of why Black Lives Matter. you know, because we're all getting tired of having that conversation, right? And I
Amen.
appreciate that they were willing to support this without us having to explain, well, we've been oppressed and, you know, we get profiled, and we didn't have to go into any of that. And it really, in a way though, it makes me kind of sad, because we shouldn't have to explain it to anyone why this is important. But I'm glad that we didn't have to with the Jewish community. You know, as for the idea of kind of Black America coveting something different, my take on that is this. Because of the disparities in this country, we have a lot of Black people who are growing up still poverty, illiteracy, violence, lack of everything, right? And so for young people who are coming up in communities like that, for them, the dream is getting out. It's getting the hell out. It is not, I'm gonna go to college and get my degree and come back and live in the projects, you know, not trying to disparage the projects. I mean, I grew up in an inner city in the Bronx. I don't want to go back there. And so I think what the Jewish community has always had, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it has always had, wherever they were, there was a foundation with a lot of pride, a great deal of pride, because they always had that culture and that heritage and that history, that thing of which to be proud. We're still figuring it out. That's why some of us love Ancestry.com so much, because we're trying to figure out where we came from, who we belong to, and find pride in that. But then besides our own genetic lineage, it is, we still have a black community across the nation that we have to teach to love itself, right? Because we got so many messages throughout the years that we weren't lovable, we weren't worthy, we weren't valued. And some of that we bought into, but we also didn't have the opportunity to create all of this wonder, this wonderful society that was our own. We had to assimilate, right? In order to be successful, you better assimilate. And sometimes part of your success is going to depend very much on that, where you live, you know, the job that you have. And so, you know, and that's where Black people get into the whole idea of, well, you sold out, you're trying to be white. I think some people just want relief from suffering. And so I think that we kind of are always walking that line, right? Now, I will say that when we're successful, damn, you're right, we need to go back. We need to put a hand out to help somebody else. We need to volunteer. We need to mentor. We need to do something to help someone besides our families and our immediate households. But I think that Black people will struggle with that for a long time until certain inequities are removed and certain barriers are removed. And then I think you will see that they can start creating more of their own. But for right now, a lot of what white America offers is relief from certain financial suffering and social suffering.
So what I'd say is, yes, yet I wasn't talking about going back to the inner city that you didn't like, or anyone going back to the projects. And I also don't believe I go back to that thing of monolithic. What I mean is turning the backs. Like, in other words, I'm sure you've heard it before. There are Black folks on one side of town that say, oh, I don't go over there, or I don't mess with them, because they've taken on and internalized this same hatred of self and others that look like themselves and see themselves as the exceptions. I'm big time on not believing that we need to be monolithic. In fact, for a part of my evolution as a man over the last 30 years is 30 years ago, at 23 years old, I thought that as a Black person, if you didn't believe what I believed, then you weren't fighting like I was fighting, and you weren't standing up for your people like I was standing up for my people, that you were a sellout. I don't believe that anymore. Not everyone has the same approach to everything. So no, I don't come from that perspective, but I come from this perspective that we forget. And Michael, maybe you can speak to this saying. I'm going to say two words. What does this mean to the Jewish community? Like, for us, it's about getting out sometimes. We'll keep having that conversation. But these two words I've heard in the Jewish community for years and years and years. Never again. What does that mean to you?
So you put that in multiple contexts. I think one of the, I'll answer that question by kind of going back a couple steps to also something that Jay said earlier, is that another lesson I think that the Jewish experience might have to offer is that the Jewish people, and this is transcends every denomination. You know, I think most people, when you say Jewish people, but most people who in this country, when they run into a Jewish person, you don't know, is that person Torah observant and Orthodox like I am? Is that person Reconstructionist, Reform, Conservative? There's a lot of disparity there. But almost without exception, if you identify in any one of those places, you have and have been raised with a very, very powerful and cohesive national story. And we have a model that we've been transmitting that story for thousands of years. We all sit at a table every spring at Passover, and we discuss it, and we discuss it for hours. And that story about where we come from, who we are, what it means, what it should mean to you and my kids now, and they ask me questions and we talk about it. And we do the same thing every year. They've been doing it as long as they've been alive. They know it cold, but we still do it. And almost every Jew of every stripe, no matter how distant or removed you are from ritual or religion, will still show up at one of those Seders, at a Passover Seder, almost without exception. Why? Because deep down somewhere, they're drawn to that story, and that story has meaning to them and has meaning to their children and has meaning to who they are and how they view themselves. And I think that every child should be raised with a story of who they are and where they're from and what that means and why that's important, and that I'm a link in a chain and that there's something bigger than me that I stand for. And almost every Jewish kid is raised with some semblance of that. Of course, there's a lot more variety now. I mean, yeah. but I think that and when never again comes up in the discussion, one of the reasons why we weren't destroyed in the Holocaust when we should have been, we had no country, and more than half of our numbers were decimated and had no land of our own. The only reason why there is a Jewish people still is because of that there's a national story that persists and transcends and we view as a continuous link.
Yeah. And so not only is that, everyone talks about a foundation, but in that foundation, it is grounding. And one of the differences, and you say that lesson can be offered, there was a time when, I think it was like early 90s, late 80s, when there was a movement by a group of Black men who were saying, let's sort of mirror this bar mitzvah for the Jewish boys at 13 and look for some sort of a rite of passage for Black boys, particularly in the sense that so many things were going on with incarceration, et cetera. With that said, clearly, not going to the history lesson completely here today, but one of the things that I think was so diabolical about the slave trade from Eastern Africa into the shores of, from West Africa into the shores of Eastern United States, is this notion of a preconceived plan to take those things and understand that if you strip people of their religions, if you strip people of their cultures, if you strip people of their names, then you can kill their spirit and their soul and who they are as much as you can do anything. And to a large degree, some folks would take issue with me on this, but to a large degree, I believe in something called PTSD, but post-traumatic slave disorder, in the sense that we are still affected by that as Black folks here, because we don't have those kinds of things that you're talking about. And it's all the more reason that I believe that this sort of marriage or relationship between Blacks and Jews in the United States could be critical going forward. Lisa, you got anything?
I think a lot of it, I feel like with the ideal of faith, and Kenny, how you were just touching on, when you take away someone's culture, when you take away someone's faith, the Jewish people have a long history of being oppressed on our planet, and they never lost their faith. Their faith got to stay with them. And at the end of the day, like we all, when you have 3 days of rain, you have faith that the sun is going to come back out. And so you don't let that gray weather get you down, and you can fight through it. And I think that when you think of the grounding that a huge majority of Black Americans have, it gets to be, here's your connection. Your connection is, don't talk about it, but it's slavery. Nothing happened before. You don't know where in Africa you're from. Don't talk about it, though, because it makes us uncomfortable because we did something naughty. Don't talk about it, though. But here's the chains that you're associated with. And so how do you not feel like the sun's never going to come out? And so it's like, as America, as a country, that's our job. we need to prove that the sun will come out. And it's like, let's go back and educate on history, educate on what Africa did, educate that your vaccinations was completely came from Africa. Like, let's do that so that you are here and you get to have a backstory and your faith can rebuild. And I think that that's what we got to figure out, a way to deliver to the masses across our world.
That's good. Good stuff. So we're going to take a little break here and we're going to come back and talk about, I like what you said. I want to build a little bit on how the Jewish people were able to survive without a country, and how, in some sense, metaphorically, African Americans in the United States don't have a country. So let's take a little break here and we'll open back up with that in the same conversation.
Bye, guys.